Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the Interventional Endoscopist podcast. I'm your host, Munkavel Suchdave. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Fritz Haller, who is the CEO of Endolastic. Fritz, welcome. Welcome. So, Fritz is CEO of a company called Endolastic, and we'll get into what Endolastic does in a few moments. He actually studied at Vanderbilt University, and then eventually settled on a career in medical device at Cook Medical, where he was the director of product and marketing. He was there for about 7 years, almost 8 years, and then ended up going to Intelligent Endoscopy, which was another company that he ended up selling to Steris. And recently, as of August 2024, he's been the CEO and co-founder of Endolastics. Fritz, why don't you, before we get into a little bit about you, why don't you tell me a little bit about Endolastic, and then I also want to bring up an interesting fact that I learned about you in the last few days.
Sure. So Endolastic is an extension of what we were doing at Intelligent Endoscopy. It's a band ligation device. We're a one-trick pony. We focus on a rubber band gun, we call it. And we customize this band ligation device, and then we point it at different parts of the GI anatomy, starting off with the lower esophageal sphincter for the treatment of GERD. And many of you are familiar a little bit with that. And then something a little bit more out there is for obesity. We actually point the rubber band gun at the 5 folds that are in the greater curve of the stomach to mimic what would be a sleeve gastroplasty. We actually call it a band gastroplasty. We talk a little bit about that later. And then the more space age one, which seems super out there, but it's actually, not that difficult. It's actually, pretty simple, is to remove the mucosal layer of that 10 centimeters of duodenum, the gut brain, if you will, which is insulin resistant. And then just through natural banding, you have tissue regrowing through the natural pressure necrosis. It's sort of like the fountain of youth. You end up with a fresh cap of mucosal layer, and it's safe and effective. And, just like you've probably seen Fractal or Endogenics or Medical, it follows that, except instead of a $25,000 device with all sorts of capital and all sorts of crazy stuff going on. No offense to them, because they were first, and they get all the credit for the science of it. We do it in a much simpler way. It's more affordable and accessible.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that we know about medical device is it's really hard to be first, but when you get to be first, you create all the benefit for yourself. But then what you also do is open the doorway for better and quicker, or maybe better, maybe not. We'll leave that alone because that's a scientific thing, but more efficient ways of doing things, and sometimes cheaper, sometimes more cost effective. So, someone's got to open the door, and then everybody else starts walking through it. So, that's a great thing. So one of the reasons I chose to interview you was because of this unique kind of approach to not just GERD management. As a guy who's done some TIF procedures, this is a really fascinating alternative. And I have done a few of these band reflux procedures as well, but with competitors. And so I was a little interested in that. And then the other one is obviously this fascinating world where we're getting into endobariatrics, and now you have this option, which, as it gets, better proven out, we might actually have a alternative to the suturing and the stapling procedures that we're having to do. But also, really cool thing about you is you have a unique journey to getting where you are now. And one of the things that people don't know about you is that you are a Olympian and a coach and a world champion in whitewater slalom. So could you tell me a little bit about that before we go into the medical part?
Sure. I grew up in Baltimore, and here's another little known fact. My dad was chief of pediatric surgery at Hopkins.
Oh, wow.
He's also a surgeon. And I ran the other way as fast as I could. It's a miracle that I'm back in this area. My dad was an innovator. He actually he was the first one to do flying EMS, we call it, where they have the helipad. It was right at Children's Center at Hopkins. He put that all together back in the 70s. And that's now a model, around the world. But I was at summer camp in North Carolina. Came on down to North Carolina. I was a pretty good kayaker, but not competitive. And this was back in '72. The Olympics were in Munich, and this often happens. These two guys from camp came back who had competed in the Olympics, and they had that grainy Super 8 video flickering.
Yeah.
They're all the nightly event, and I was just blown away, by whitewater slalom and what that could be like. And at the end, I think everybody went to dinner, or they probably went off to some other activity. I remember looking around. I was probably 13, and I was the only one there. Thinking about aha moments or something. I was like, well, I'm going to do this. It wasn't that simple. It took a while. It was many years, but I ended up racing on the team for several years. Won a couple of world championships and a couple of World Cups. Whitewater had been dropped from the Olympic program, unfortunately. So during my prime, I never competed in the Olympics.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, my whole goal, I had two simple dreams. One was to be a high school teacher, and the other one was to be a wrestling coach. And that was it. Money had nothing to do with any of this, obviously. And so I was actually able to get my K through 12 teaching degree, and actually was able to teach coach high school wrestling for 2 years before I made the U.S. team and started on that path. But yeah, so I'd already retired. My brother was racing, and he was actually a world champion of his own. Like his name's Fritz Haller, and so I coached Barcelona. So in 1992, and it's sort of a dubious thing because my brother was World Cup champion coming in, and I coached him down to 4th place. He's now watching. But I actually did coach a gold medal 2-man canoe, which was my event, and so we did. Yeah, I was able to coach a gold medalist in 1992, and that's about the.
It's about there. No, that's awesome. It's a very unique experience. I think anytime you get to meet somebody who's been a world champion, that's fascinating. So, and so tell a little bit more. So you grew up in Baltimore. Father was a pediatric surgeon. You went to Vanderbilt. Kind of, what did you study out there, and then how did you end up going from being an Olympic coach and being a high school teacher and a wrestling coach to actually getting into the medical device world?
Oh, good question. Well, I studied history and I taught history because I taught in the high school system for 2 years, and I raced on the team for several years, and then, as we say, I coached Barcelona, and then I came back and coached Atlanta in '96.
Okay.
Whitewater was firmly back into the program, as it still is. You can watch Whitewater Slalom today. It's interesting though. Back then, you got to remember this was. Look at this age here. For those listening, there's this thing called the Soviet Union, and there's a wall that was there. And so our biggest competitors in whitewater slalom were the Czechs, the Russians, obviously, the Soviet Union, and the Polish. The East Germans were the top. They were all the people we emulated. And so we only got to see them once a year in international competitions because we obviously couldn't interact and do anything like it is today. So that's something sort of interesting on that note. And then for some reason early on, I'll sort of extend this. I don't know if this is part of your question, but maybe it's a later one, but I'll just sort of offer it out there.
Yeah.
I became really interested early on in innovation in sports.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure why. But I started watching, different athletes do different things, not only in my sport. And so an example of this would be this high school high jumper in Portland, Oregon. This is back in '68, all the way back in 1968. I read about this.
Mm-hmm.
Blew me away. And he would run up to the high jump. At that point, they would jump over the high jump with a scissors kick and sort of roll over the high jump. And they would incrementally go up the heights, as was typically, sort of the way the sport worked. This guy, the newspaper in Portland, Oregon, called him the laziest high jumper in the world. he would run up to the bar, and then instead of doing the scissor kick, he turned backwards and he flopped backwards over the bar.
Fosder.
Take a flop. Bro, the Fosbury flop.
Yeah.
Everybody laughed. It was hilarious. And then he went on to win the Olympic gold medal in 1968 in Mexico City.
Yeah.
And now everything changed. So he completely changed the high jump technique, and everybody started innovating. And they've since sort of done different things. But for a long time, that was sort of the way that he changed it. I don't know if that's really what started all this, but I was a kayaker, but I remember watching Pablo Morales in the backstroke in the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first time it ever happened. He blasted off the backstroke, and you do that dolphin kick underwater, come up and backstroke. He did the entire first lap underwater. Never came up.
Yep.
Leaky rat out of air, but he went like 3/4 of the way the second one.
Yeah.
And knowing that was the fastest way to move underwater was, a reverse dolphin kick. So that blew me away. So I started looking for these things in sport. And, there's other examples that, I can go on and on. In aviation, it was Chuck Yeager coming next to the sound barrier when all the things reversed.
Yeah.
Actually reversed his controls and went through the sound barrier. So I studied that. I read all about that and The Right Stuff and other books. I probably don't have it right, but I was just fascinated by flipping things upside down and maybe looking at them, from a different angle. And that's kind of how I arrived when I was at Cook Medical. I'd finished the Atlanta Olympics, and I started a company in Santiago, just looking for medical devices and things like that, Santiago, Chile. And I thought that was going to be my career, sort of distributing medical devices. And I called Cook Medical looking for an interosseous needle.
Uh-huh.
Pretty clever device. Cook made it. They were the only ones that had it. And they said, you can't have the device because we have a distributor there. But what are you doing for the next few years?
Uh-huh.
I flew up. I became the director of Latin America so I got pulled back into this.
Yeah.
I thought I'd completely escaped from.
That's awesome. So, yeah, I know. Getting to your point on innovation in sports, it's actually interesting, like how some of these take off and then some don't. So, I'm always fascinated by the story of in basketball for free throws of the granny shot. The granny shot is actually the most accurate way to make a free throw, and Malcolm Gladwell talked about this in one of his podcasts as well. And when you have a guy like Shaquille O'Neal, who was such a dominant force in the late 90s or early 2000s as a center, but he couldn't shoot a free throw to save his life. And all he had to do was convert to a granny method. And he probably would have been like an 80% free throw shooter. But people don't do it because it doesn't look cool. But like one guy like him does that. Next thing you know, you're going to spawn off a revolution of kids doing it. Like Steph Curry coming in, making the 3-point shot. Cool. All of a sudden, every kid, I go to my son's basketball games. He's 13 and he's been playing since he was 8 or 9. Every kid thinks that they're the next Steph Curry, taking shots 3 feet behind the 3-point line and airballing every single one of them, maybe making 1 out of 50. But it's revolutionized because people saw that and now they want to do that. And so it's fascinating that you get something like the Fosbury flop that gets a guy a gold medal. Now everyone is doing it that way versus, something different. So innovation is great, but people have to accept it too,
I'm going to take that all the way back to my rubber band gun. Okay. Talk about it. See, like it's a proven technology. Obviously, there's the ligation.
Right.
Pearls are 9 millimeters wide. For anybody that doesn't know, they're only 10 millimeters deep.
Yeah.
The bands are all, basic, toy helicopter bands, for lack of a better word. There's nothing to think about. It works great for variceal ligation and hemorrhoid use. The soft varix kind of get in there.
Mm-hmm.
But early on, it's been 20 years now, I guess, I started thinking about flipping that switch and maybe creating larger, deeper barrels, different types of bands, things like that. Basically, at Endolastic, I love the granny shot because we're basically taking a proven, but all endoscopists know how to do, right? All know how to shoot bands, but then pointing it in a different direction and just, putting a little twist on it. And lo and behold, taking on, GERD and obesity, and then later it's going to be type 2 diabetes mellitus.
No, and yeah, I mean, these are the innovations that we need, and taking products that we have currently and doing them differently and better. And I think we'll get into one of the things that I'm fascinated about the rubber band design as well in a minute. But before we go down, I got couple more quick questions about just kind of your background. Are there any kind of events or um, situations in your youth or your childhood that kind of you look back now and say, if this hadn't happened, I probably wouldn't have done what I'm doing now. Are there any influences? Was it your parents? Was it something in school? What kind of, do you look at, like, if without this happening to me, I would never have done what I'm doing now? Is there anything that you can put a finger on?
What's the ancient question? Yeah, it's something did happen. How did you know? Like a therapy session. I feel like I got to get over on the couch here. Yeah, my brother and I were racing, C2, the 2-man kayak, for lack of better word, and we couldn't get fast enough. We couldn't get past the French. We couldn't get past the East Germans at the time. The World Championships were a year away. It was 1983. They were going to be in Murano, Italy, and we couldn't generate the speed that we needed and have the proper technique. So my dad, the guy we talked about before, who was pediatric surgeon, he was another thing. He was a huge fan of whitewater slalom. He was our biggest fan. And so we went to the World Cup that year. I think we finished 9th or 10th or something. And we gave him one of those old video cameras, and we said, Dad, just film these people. We gave him a list of, this year's world champion, World Cup champion, everybody.
Yeah.
Well, go film these people as much as you can, every situation you can. Dad was in.
Yeah.
And so we did that for about 3 weeks. We got this big bag of old Super 8 videos, took them back to our coach, and we spent the whole fall retooling all of our technique. And we did it looking at these videos. So we would be doing different movements and different gait combinations, getting ready. Well, we didn't realize there was something wrong with the battery pack or the connection of the battery on the video camera.
Right.
Very insidiously, unnoticeably, it was playing back too fast. And so everything that we were looking at, all these world champions and trying to mimic their technique, was always a little bit faster than what it should have normally been. We had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so our coach, we broke everything down. We found new ways to stroke faster. We added weights to our paddle, kind of like baseball players, but nothing had been done like this in whitewater. We dragged tennis balls behind our boat to put more drag. We did a whole bunch of things. Mm-hmm. And we got a new speed. It was called warp speed. And it was all, back after Star Trek. And so we never saw our competitors, for the whole year. So we didn't have anything to judge it on. We got to the practice session before the 83 World Championships and watched all of our competitors during their sessions. And my coach was just smiling. And he said, you guys are going to win. You guys you're faster, you're better. You've got a new technique. It was completely by accident.
Okay, you were watching faster videos and you guys were having to match that.
See, the granny shot. The funny thing is, then we won the World Championships, and then we won it again after that. But we had to innovate again for that, and that was lighter boats. We had technology where we could get our boats, carbon fiber and vacuum suction and stuff like that. Right. So every time you win, you have to keep going. Like, you have to innovate, beyond where you were. So we won both the 83 and the 85 World Championships, based on that. It's funny, though, because I was reading, and it turns out that the East German sprinters did something similar. They actually ran downhill on an incline.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was to fool their neurological electrical system, musculature, to run faster. So we did it. It was completely an accident for us.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. That's awesome.
I don't know the name of the brand of the camera, but thanks to them, we became world champions. But awesome. East Germans did it they did it purposely.
Yeah. That's awesome. So I guess kind of another question, but related, you get into Cook Medical, and prior to that you're selling products in South America, and you get into Cook Medical, and then you go to your next company, and now you're with Endolastic. Somewhere along the line, earlier in your medical device career, is there a failure that kind of shaped how you are now? Is there something that you look back on that you're thankful for? Maybe at the time you weren't, but you're thankful now that that happened because it taught you the lessons that you need to do to start a company.
Oh, so many failures. In office, I had a wall of shame that I would put up with all the devices, that we tried and try to do. Remember too, like I can say this now looking back, and some of y'all may disagree, or some of y'all may be before their time. We're talking about, 2001 to, really 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
We literally put out about 7 or 8 winning brands into the market. And that's with Boston Scientific being our competitor. So the Hercules balloon fusion, I was the director of that program for the short wire system to go against Boston Scientific's RX.
Yeah.
You get all the ultrasound needles, the ultra. We did hemospray.
Right.
All that was on my watch. Before I left. I'm not taking any credit. I'm a coach. I coached it. My team coached it. But I guess if I had to pick one wall of shamer, let me think. Okay. If y'all do ERCP and you're using short wire,
Yeah.
so you're probably working the wire yourself. The Boston Scientific or Olympus, or now everybody's doing it. You have different systems. But I was working with Dr. Steve Deal down at Carolina Medical Center. He was my partner in that whole team for fusion. And we came up with a don't laugh, or you can laugh. We had a little, like a utility belt that the endoscopist would put around their waist. And then they would take the endoscope and they would just dock it, a little docking station. We'd be able to listen. And the idea came from Dr. Freeman, because Dr. Freeman said that he had a little belt or something that he put together and stuff. And so, again, the granny shop. It's like we were taking old stuff and saying, well, what if an endoscopist could just dock this thing, and then you could have both hands free.
Yeah.
You could work the wire, and you could do all sorts of things with the catheter and the sphinctertome and all this wonderful stuff with stents. And we thought it was the greatest we ever heard. We launched this thing at DDW. I guess they're all laughing. But you never hear that, right? Because to be a good innovator, you have to be, deaf. Just stop. But I still have a package. I kept it. I kept one scope dock, and I'm sure Cook no longer sells it. But it was not a big winning device. How's that for you?
So I have a story for you about the scope dock, actually. Huh?
I want to hear it.
Yeah. So, I think it was probably 2013 or 14. And, so I trained at Northwestern as an interventional endoscopist, and, Cook was a large supporter of that program because one of my mentors, Sri Kamanduri, was using a lot of, Cook products. And in fact, his sales rep in the Chicago area, Mark Cotton, was one of the, he performed in the top 2 or 3 several times. I think it's salesman of the year, like 4 or 5 times. Yeah, number 1. Yeah. So I had him in my phone as Mark 2-time Cotton, the salesman of the year Cotton, in my phone when I was in Chicago. So they sponsored, pretty aggressively, the Chicago Live when it first started. And so at the end of the first night, there would be a faculty dinner. Well, there actually wasn't faculty. It was just a dinner at, the Budkiss restaurant, the steakhouse. And so we had the top floor of that restaurant for the course. And I was sitting with two Cook reps, and, everyone was having a good time that night. And all of a sudden I went off on a tangent because I had just seen the little DVD of, Ken Bimmuller demonstrating this scope dock. And, I started making fun of it because, quite honestly, it's got a little bit of a phallic appearance to it. You put it on and the scope sits over your waist, and like you said, your hands are free and you're doing an endoscopy, and it's very strange. But the concept was fascinating to me. And I just went off for about an hour making jokes about it. And I said, I want one. We can't give you one. So no, I want one. He said, no, you can't win you one. I said, do it. I go, you've got a factory full of these things. And my language was much more colorful. I said, there's nobody buying these. I haven't ever seen one anywhere. And of course, I'm only at this point, I've been in endoscopy, for 5 years. So it's not like I've seen a lot at that point, but I've never seen anybody with one, never seen anybody wear one, never seen anybody order one. You've got a factory and they're collecting dust. Just give me one. And he's like, we're not going to give you one sachet. I said, okay, fine, whatever. And so I joke and we go off and do our next thing. 3 days later at my front door of my house, there's a scope doc waiting for me. And I have it in my endoscopy center right next door. I have it. I've used it twice. They gave me a whole little thing of, but the problem is there's no instructions online. So I've got the belt, I've got the insert, but I can't figure out how to connect them together. So I have it and it's sitting there, but I don't use it. But I actually initially I make my own slides. And I learned that from Dr. Chang, another guy who worked strongly with Cook. I make my own slides. And so that was very helpful in that situation where you can just put the scope in and then you do your thing. So, but I have one. So
Call Mark Cotton. I don't think he's retired yet. I haven't supposed to.
He's probably in San Diego today. So yeah, because DDW starts tonight/tomorrow morning. So he's probably out there. So
Yeah, that's right. Yep. That's right. DW.
So, okay, so let's switch gears. Let's get into the innovation portion, right? So, when you are innovating, and you took a product, as simple as a bander, as you mentioned, a rubber band gun. But when you're innovating, how do you personally distinguish between a good idea, a great idea, or something that's not so good, as an innovator?
Yeah. Well, I've already shown you my track record of the wall of shame. I guess I'll go from experience. This gray-haired old guy. I guess for me, honestly, if something really interests me, and I don't think this is for everyone, but if something really interests me and I just want to dive into it, and it seems like a worthy market and a worthy disruptor of that market, I'm all about disruption, as we already talked about.
Yeah, for sure.
If it's real interesting to me, I try to find out about it. And if it's interesting to me, I take the jump, and not in a cocky way or anything like that, but I take the jump to think it might be interesting to others.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can explain that and it sort of makes sense, then I sort of do the research and dive in. Cook was interesting because the marketing department and the product management department were one. I was director of both departments.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can imagine, those who are listening, if you're in the industry, you'd be in a meeting for R&D to get the priority list for the year. And the product managers would trape in and they would give you the market number for that disease state for the device they're developing. 800 million, 2 billion, people suffering from GERD, therefore, using GERD as an example.
Right.
Therefore, if 25% of them, fit this model, then you're at 800 million. And this is always how it goes in industry. You sort of listen to this. It's usually a PowerPoint. And then they come up with a final number, and then you cut that in half, and you cut it in half again. And then you sort of look at it, to see if it's worthy, because, when you're in industry, not just as a small company like Endolastic or Intelligent Endoscopy, you can sort of do whatever you want.
Right.
Going all the way back, if I can, I'll be really short. Just not always,
Please.
But Bill Cook, because Cook was a private company.
Right.
Cook, who we all revered, who was really iconoclastic and different and, really not part of the normal model. Bill Cook, who started, obviously, Cook Medical and Interventional Radiology with the idea that everything is a tube. Your whole body is tubes.
Mm-hmm.
Just started making, catheters to fit that. And he teamed up with some brilliant doctors, Seldinger for the Seldinger, all this was right back in the day. And he could make whatever he wanted. And we used to joke about that at Cook Endoscopy because, there's no shareholders. So we were like, you can just do whatever you want.
Right.
You just went with this guy. That was it. It's like the interosseous needle. That doesn't make sense. There's only 10, children that will need that, per state, per year. And he was, I don't care. I'm doing it. There's kind of that model. So if it interests me and I think it's there, then you have to sort of look at the market, to do that. And then for me, I'm such a fanatic on band ligation. It's hard to get me off of that. I could talk to you about how we did the Procore needle where we put a side hole in the needle, and well, that was on my watch. That was my department. All of those things, I could talk about those cool technological things that you can prove out.
Yeah.
But in band ligation, when I started intelligent endoscopy, we created the smart band system, and our band was better for retention of tissue. And we could prove it had the cool little delta shapes on top and bottom that would capture tissue, and we could show you a 30% greater, tissue retention, all those wonderful things. I sold that company to Steris Corporation back in 2020, but you can still get smart band today. But it's got those, cool things. Show that to doctors. I was rewarded with a golf clap. At best.
Yeah.
And then it was like, where are you on contract? And then what's the pricing? And then, so it's hard to get, you can fall in love with, so first of all, if you're really interested in something, second of all, is the market there, understand here. Thirdly would be, can you get that innovative idea, past those barriers? And, these are wonderful physicians, but if you ask them, is band slippage off variceal pseudopolyps a problem for you? They'll go, no, it's not a problem. You go, well, here's a study that shows that it is. Well, you have to be really careful about this because these are, these are expert endoscopists. So here you are, Joe Schmo.
Yeah.
Coming from industry. So it's really tricky. That's 3. 4 is a real quandary. And that is the better endoscopists, and this in different areas, the better the endoscopist, they don't need the fancy gadgets. We used to say you can cannulate with a garden hose.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of counterintuitive because, we'll show up with this, this is a self-guiding catheter that will cannulate the bile duct. And they're like, well, we don't need this. Come back. Are you on contract? What's the price? The same sort of.
Yeah.
So those are 4 sort of, challenges. But I mean, I would recommend anybody that's getting into product management or getting into marketing, if something really interests you and it seems like it's a difference maker and it's in a market that can support it.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good indication that it's worth, going forward. Now, if you're in a industry, you have to be an intrapreneur, right? So you have to sort of sell people on that. So, you sort of have to use your soft skills, I guess, to try to help coach your team and get them through. There's politics and everything. If you do want to take a jump to be an entrepreneur, where you're signing the front of the check and the back, that has its own risks and things like that. And that's sort of my answer to that question. I hope that's satisfying.
Oh no, absolutely. And kind of along those lines, like, you talk about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs, but like some of the people listening to this podcast are, interventional endoscopists themselves, or like you said, or like we've talked about earlier, people in the industry. And amongst those group of people, there are people who have ideas and, they want to be innovators. And so what kind of advice, as someone who's been in this world now for, greater than 20 years, like what kind of advice do you have to somebody who wants to be an innovator or has an innovative idea? And how do they go from being someone who has a good idea to making it a great idea?
Great question. I just worked with a guy who's a friend of a friend who's a surgeon that called me and wanted that. He had a great idea. He was already working on a prototype. And so I kind of helped him, through that system. Well, first of all, if you're working with industry and a guy like Mark Cotton, who in all seriousness is a complete professional, he's wonderful. And I don't know what Cook looks like because I left in 2015 and I took all that out of my head. for lots of reasons, right? I didn't want to run afoul of, inventions and things like that. Wanted to just keep things, on my side. So, but great group of people over there. They will, if you have an idea, you can mention it to your rep, and they will, if they're doing their job right, Boston Scientific, Olympus, and you have a good relationship, and they have to know you a little bit, like you were talking about when you were starting out with the scope doc. They might not have known you well enough. You could talk, I guess. Talk to your mentor. Shri could probably get you the connection. But you can usually get an engineer to come over and look at your idea and sign an NDA and things like that. But industry typically doesn't rip off doctors. That's in my experience.
Right.
NDAs are good, they're great, but if you have a guy come visit you, it's normally a reputable company like ConMed or Olympus or Boston Scientific or pick one. They're usually pretty reputable. They're not going to rip off their customer. So that's one way.
Yeah.
That's what Dr. Doodle did, and we worked together on Fusion, short wire. He has a house on Lake Norman. Honestly, it can go that way. It can go lots of different ways. It depends on what you're interested in and how you want to work it and things like that. Dr. Freeman did the Freeman stent for Hobbs. He didn't take any royalties at all. That I can bring that whole story up, but that's one way. Another way is it's not that expensive to call a patent attorney and just get a provisional patent in on your idea, some drawings, some descriptions, and just get a provisional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In the old ways, it was you write a letter to yourself and address it, and that was legal, and you could, as long as it was stamped, you could open it up and prove that was your idea and it predated. The way to do it is just to get a provisional patent. It's not expensive, 4 or 5 pieces of paper, or some drawings, some ideas, some claims maybe. If you work with a patent attorney, they can get your independent claims. That way you have a priority date, so you are protected. Because, there's plenty of room for great ideas out there. I might be talking to somebody that has a breakthrough right now. I hope I am.
Yeah.
You are. Find a patent attorney that's reputable. You're gonna drop $5,000, but you're not gonna drop, $100,000, $20,000.
Right.
So get
$5,000 will probably protect you down the road from losing $100,000.
or more.
Yeah. Or more. Yeah.
You have a good idea. Talking to people you trust. So obviously, the world's about people. It doesn't seem like it today, but it is. No, it's about people. So use your soft skills, trust the people you trust, but do try to get it, get credit for it, because ideas are awesome. I mean, they're sacred. I mean, that's amazing. The ideas that people come up with. I love these ideas. And so do that. And then finally, so 1, work with industry if you're comfortable. 2, get the darn thing provisionally patent. That's all you have to do. You have a year to work on it to get your patent application. You can do all the studies. Just get the darn thing provisionally protected. Number 2. And the third one is there's this new animal called contract manufacturers, and they're wonderful. Mm-hmm. Like with Endolastic, Intelligent Endoscopy, we had our own clean rooms, we had employees. I mean, it was everything I do not like about industry. It was like, here we go again. The next thing we're going to do is have meetings, right? Just don't ever get to having meetings. If we have meetings, I'm quitting.
Yeah.
But there's a thing called a contract manufacturer and there's some good ones here in North Carolina, but I'm sure in every state you can probably find them. And they will actually use their quality system, manufacture a product. And if you're a doctor and you have a great idea, you can meet with them. You can pay as you go. They can do some prototypes and give them back to you. It's really wonderful that they have that skill set to actually do exactly what you're asking, where you can, get an early prototype. And again, you're going to drop $5,000, $7,500, $10,000, but you're not going to break the bank, and they can take you as far as you want. I mean, they'll make your product and sell it to a company if you want, but that would be the third thing. I would say, and if they want to hit me up on Endolastic, I have a good patent attorney. I'm happy to send them a link, and also have a good 2 actually contract manufacturers that do exactly this. They'll take you to the next step. Like, I think if I did it this way, I could actually put it down the endoscope. They'll give you something you can actually put down the scope, maybe like a 3D printer handle that you can actually action. You know what I mean? Something like that. So that would be my 3 pieces of advice.
Okay. Well, that's amazing. I think anyone who's listening, I think that's very beneficial. So, kind of shifting gears from innovation, and before we get into kind of a little bit more on the details of the Endolastic and the bands, just a couple quick questions about leadership, and because obviously you've been a leader now, and back to your coaching days, you're a leader of a team, and now you're leading a company, and you were leading a department at Cook. So as you've taken on leadership roles, how has your definition of success kind of evolved? I think the obvious thing is success as a coach is, did you win the championship or did you make significant improvements? But how has your definition of success gone, even maybe from when you were an athlete to now being the CEO of a company?
If you gave me that question at a board game, I would pass. Actually, it's funny you say the last thing that you said about winning. I won 2 world championships and then coaching an Olympic champion. My dream always, once I was waiting for the program to come back into the Olympics, because I was world champion in 1979, and we boycotted the Moscow Olympics. I was world champ going into the Moscow Olympics and boycotted, so I couldn't, we couldn't compete. And whitewater was in the program. So I have a love-hate relationship, with the Olympics.
Yeah.
But a little known fact is that if you are Olympic champion in whatever sport, if you go to Colorado Springs and you go up Pikes Peak, which is right outside the Olympic Training Center, it's quite a hike in Merritt. There's an Olympic wall, and any Olympic champion has their name inscribed in the stone wall above there. And since I was already a world champion, I was, you have this dream, you're driving, you're training, you're doing everything. My goal is to have my brother and I, inscribed on that wall. Not an egotistical thing. It wasn't like that. It was just as a closure, to fair and all that, kind of get something we could pass on to our kids, that kind of thing. And the Olympics passed by my span, my competitive span. It didn't come back into the program because after 80, they dropped the program, and I missed right after the boycott. LA, they didn't have an artificial course in 84. I could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
And, so I came back to coach the team in 92, and I coached an Olympic gold medal. It was Joe Jacoby and Scott Strasbaugh were in my club, and I coached them to Olympic gold medal. That was in July of 92 in Barcelona. In October, I stood at the top of Pikes Peak and watched the ceremony, and I watched Joe and Scott, have their names carved in stone for all time.
That's amazing.
This time as your coach.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let me make it any. So doing stuff for others and coaching others is way more satisfying, in my opinion. I'm sure other people probably, have different opinions, but for me, however I'm wired, that's the gold ring. In fact, I still wear, not all the time, but I wear my Olympic gold medal. I don't know if you can see that there. Yeah. It's not vanity. I'm not trying to, I'm telling you, I wear it for a reason. It's not the reason you think. I actually wear it to remind me of the fact that I didn't pay attention to the detail in order to coach my brother to a gold medal, in the same Olympics. And so I remind myself of paying attention to detail, sweating out the details, trying to keep my head where my feet are, those kinds of sports analogies. And so honestly, I don't wear it all the time, but I wear it every now and then, just as sort of a subtle reminder, to keep my eye on the ball. As for leadership, honestly, I think the question misses the point a little bit. If somebody, this is my opinion, if he calls himself a leader, probably not.
That's a good point.
And there's all these leadership seminars, and they do all this stuff. For me, the definition of a perfect leader, no surprise, is my dad. And in all ways, but mainly as chief pediatric surgery at Hopkins. He trained so many. Pediatric surgery wasn't a thing when my dad started, and so little people, they used little regular instruments. And so they had to develop the whole, modality of pediatric surgery. And so what people say about my dad was that he was amazingly enthusiastic and he was able to lead teams. Of course, I didn't pay any attention when I should have. And as far as I could to Santiago, Chile, right, and whitewater kayaking, I got as far away as I could. As that's just the thing, rebellion.
Yeah.
But looking back, somebody who knew him really well told me this. I'll never forget it, and hopefully this helps somebody out there thinking about this question. The word enthusiasm actually comes from the Greek word theos, which literally means God. And to be enthusiastic is to be touched by God. You know your mentors, you know your teachers. You know this is true. You know who inspired you. You know who lit that fire of interest in you. Those people are enthusiastic. And whether we use the word leader or not, I think it's overused. Honestly, I don't think anybody should worry if in a political setting they're not seen as a leader or, who's the smartest person in this room or who leads this room.
Yeah.
More important to be caring and enthusiastic and have that enthusiastic be infectious to a team and for a worthy cause.
Right.
And that's also part of the thing. Like you should be able to figure out what a cause, is worthy. Hopefully it's not scope talk.
Yeah. I still think it's a very vision. So just kind of
granny shot is still. I still want to talk about the granny shot because I think it's underappreciated.
100%. So let's turn over to your current situation with Endolastic. To me, it's fascinating. It's obviously, as you mentioned a few times, it's an old technology, but it's using it for different things, right? And kind of walk me through if you had an aha moment where you're like, this. Well, first of all, let's talk about what's different about your band compared to other bands. I mean, I noticed on the website that you have these, I want to call them side ports. So these holes, kind of in four, I think of them at 12, 3, 9, or 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock on the clock. And on the, the cartoon or the animation, it shows that tissue's kind of going through the side. Yeah, exactly. And also for the people watching this on YouTube, I'll put a little link in the description to the device in the picture. So number one, how does that make that different than your standard band that we've been using for decades now for band ligation? And where did that concept come from? I know you mentioned that your first company, you had kind of these diamond notches or these divots in it, if you will. But where does this one come from, and what's the thought process behind it, and how do you feel like that helps to grab more tissue?
Right, that's a great question. Well, you start, in order to do the band, you have to start with a barrel. And we talked about how we say it's not your grandfather's barrel, or cap. It's really customized for GERD or obesity or DMR, duodenal mucosal resurfacing. So we'll look at the obesity. So for the obesity, this is what we would call a super barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And this would be a Boston Scientific captivated.
Yeah.
Those that are listening, if you have sort of a wide mouth bass fish kind of swallowing another fish,
Yeah.
it eating it up. It's also deeper. So I guess there's a lot of aha moments, but one of them right before I left Cook, Todd Barron, who's a good friend of mine, he's UNC now, but he was at Rochester then. He said he had a fellow that wanted to look at band ligation for closing perforations and, elastomerically with bands. Because in Asia, they're doing it. There's tons of studies of doing it. Of course, it has to be a smaller perforation and, things have to be, sort of a certain situation. So, and remember, everything I'm talking about is what people knew at the time.
Right.
Which was all they know is the varicose ligation. They're all 9 millimeters and they're all 10 millimeter deep. That's what you get. And that gets mucosal or submucosal tissue. It's very hard to get muscle. You can do it for EMR. That's why, when you put the snare in EMR and they just sort of shake it like a sewing machine. Yeah. See, people always wonder what they're doing. Yeah. Make sure that there isn't any muscularis propria in that pseudopolyp. So it is possible, but it's unlikely.
Right.
with that dimensions, and you're stuck with 55 centimeters of mercury, from your suction. That's all you got. You have Olympus, Pentax, or I'm telling you.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Jen, you can't put the gaskets in those scopes. That's all you're going to get when you hit the button. I know a lot of this stuff because I'm a fanatic. Like I think about hot stuff. So people are wondering about this stuff. Most people don't think about this stuff. But anyway, back to this. So Todd's fellow wanted to do a study and then publish in GIE on perforations with bands. So the last thing I did, I was probably walking out the door. I sent a whole box of 6-shooters over to Todd up in Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
Due to his word, he does the study. I think he did 2 perfs in the colon, 2 in the stomach, 2 in the duodenum, maybe 2 in the esophagus. There's a great paper on GIE that lays it all out. He survives the pigs. He bands them and perfectly. Complete seals for all 8 perforations or something. And Todd did like he always does. He goes, conclusion, very promising, needs more study and work by industry. It's like, it says so on all of his sites. Oh, like, great. So back in intelligent endoscopy, we're working on EMR, which was trying not to get muscle in the barrels. So we had a different shape band. It was kind of a star-shaped band that would release the muscle. I think Steris is selling it.
Yes, they are actually. I have seen it. Yes, they do have that. Yeah,
I try to stay out of that, but anyway, it was, remember flipping the switch for innovation? We did not want to get muscle, so we actually innovated to make the barrel really shallow, right? So tissue will actually hit the suction port of the lens early, so it can't come up any higher.
Right.
Well, that was one. We did it with a barrel, but we also did it with a band, so that it wasn't strong enough to hold, that muscle layer inside, if you will. So I'm in there messing around, and I read Todd's article, and it was pretty cool. And so I decided, well, I got this pig stomach. It's already being used for all this other stuff. I got some time.
Yeah.
Why don't I just perforate this thing? And I took a band and I took a hot needle and I shoved a hole through the sidewall of the band, right? Just like in if you're listening.
Yeah. Okay.
We're just describing what that looked like. I did it with a hot needle, really low tech, nothing fancy. I loaded it all onto a barrel, suctioned up the perforation, right? So it looked like a pseudopolyp for those that are listening, but instead of a nice round mushroom, it had a slit in the top of it because it was a perforation, right? So you didn't get a nice puffy pseudopolyp; you just had a slit. Right. But it was in there. It was all the way in the barrel. I shot the band, and it closed the perforation. It was explanted pig tissue, nothing to write home about.
Yeah.
I did it a couple of times. Went on to the next thing. So at the end of the day, I go back and I try to take these bands off, and I usually start peeling them off with my finger or grab scissors or something. And I got to this band and I pulled it and it wouldn't come off. And I noticed that the tissue had come out the sidewall and it created a lock, a mechanical lock.
Like an anchor.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now that's called window lock band. Fancy, it's our fancy marketing name. We might change it. But I was like, wait a minute. And so I called somebody over, get this off. They couldn't get it. We had to literally shake this thing to get it off. I had to cut it off.
Wow.
So what I normally do is I had an iPhone, took a bunch of pictures. We were doing something else. I think it was EMR. I had stuff to do, right? So I took a bunch of pictures, put it up on my wall to be, the success wall or the wall of shame someday, whichever it ended up being. Yeah.
Hopefully not the wall of shame.
Ended up selling the company, in 2020. And then I was going to go off and kayak surf.
Yeah.
And my evil engineer, who'd been following all this and doing all the designs and knows all about GERD, obesity, everything, he said, no, you have to do this. I was like, darn you, You're
like, and I got out and now they sucked me back in.
But it just so happens that I have a design for that. And I ripped this picture out of my book, and he goes, "What have you done?" I said, "I just put aside, holes." He goes, "We got to get back to your inventors. We got to get a provisional patent on that right away."
Yeah.
Right. So just to tie this back into, if you have a really good idea, because these are aha moments. You all have them. trust them. They're good. And so, I mean, that was 2 years ago.
Right.
And of course, we've modified it. And some of our bands actually don't have holes. They're actually calibrated for compression so that they'll do the right kind of pressure necrosis over a certain period of time, depending on where they look at. So they don't all have holes in them. They have other sort of features
Right.
to go into them. But that, I guess I should probably give Todd a call because it's time to work on perforation. We're pointing our rubber band gun after we're pointing it at different things. Diverticulitis, you just reverse the diverticula into the, close that off with a band. We've got anything we can point our rubber band gun on and modify the band.
Mm-hmm.
For perforation, we'll probably do those plastic ties for bread ties.
Yeah.
Probably put something like that on the inside of the elastomeric thing. We already have a patent, so I can say it, but we'll probably add a little firmness because if those bands slip off of perforation, you're in trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's not just, I love the fact that these bands will probably hold, but that's not good enough. We have to make sure that they'll hold. So we're not going full on Ovesco, with Mary. We'll still stick with elastomeric, Endolastic, brand, but we may have a little bit of a plastic insert so that we can get a little bit more bite for perforations for endoscopists. But you'll be able to multiple shoot with it.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be great. I mean, I think it's going to be a great tool. If Ovesco's listening, don't send anybody after me.
Well, I mean, so you have on your website, I mean, you have 3 disease states that we've kind of touched upon. You're looking at GERD to kind of create a valve, almost like a Nissen's or a TIF or something along those lines, but to make a barrier for a reflux. You're looking at duodenal resurfacing. You're looking at endobariatrics for sleeve formation. Are you looking at other things? Well, number one, where are these technologies in terms of commercialization? When can people like myself or my colleagues who perform these procedures look to getting their hands on these things for day-to-day use? Number one. Number two, all these procedures are kind of like they're new. For example, sleeve is new on the endoscopy world for the last 4 or 5 years, and we're finally just getting a CPT code. So how would these kind of devices fit into that world of reimbursement and the ability to do them, B, the ability to get paid or reimbursed for them? And what do you see after that?
Lots of questions. Yeah. So, well, first, we have a 2-fold strategy, which we use to cook, and it works pretty well for endoscopies, especially for class 2 devices that are non-significant risk. In fact, little known fact, band ligation devices are actually exempt from 510K.
Oh,
anybody else listening? They're exact. So are forceps. So are certain needles. So you don't actually need a 510K. You do need a quality system. Yes, you do need an auditable design issue file, of course. That when you put them on the market. But we have a two-part strategy because we don't want to wait 2.5 years for the safety and effectiveness FDA clinical study to come in, which we're doing. We're getting ready to start for GERD and obesity. We had to have our pre-submission meeting, so they give us, what the N value is, what the acceptance criteria. I'm of that vein. I just meet with the FDA up front. I just put all the cards on the table because I don't want to wait until after the study and say that, oh, you didn't have a sham or it needed to be 13. But I think they're going to give us 6-month duration instead of a year because I mean that's what they did with Strata. That's what they did with esophagus. Why? I'm hoping, but wait, it's 2 weeks. We're having the meeting in 2 weeks. So
okay.
So that's the full-on treatment label. So Endoband is the name of the product, Endolastic Endoband for GERD, for the treatment of GERD. Mm-hmm. That'll be, that could be a year and a half away. But we've got great we've got great background studies. They're all hitting all their marks. PPI reduction, Demeesters. I mean, we're not worried about it. I think we're going to do really well. Yeah, you never know. But we think we're going to do really well from all indications. With obesity, same thing. Dr. Abid in Pyro, I'm trying to get him to stop. It's like, wait until we give you the laces, dude.
Yeah.
Get publishing like crazy. If you guys have looked, I mean, he's got wonderful data, and he's doing the greater curve, with banding. And so same thing with that. He will go onto a formal study with these giant, super arrows and super bands. So it's all, we get the best efficacy, we get the best durability, the best results. He's also getting early results with MAFLD and also MASH,
Right.
which is amazing.
100%.
Crazy, right? I mean, he's got data. A wonderful person. He's amazing. Dr. Beat is absolutely amazing. And so I'm going to get off track here. So that's what's our treatment on label.
Right.
You'll be using in your ASCs. Now I'll stay on that on label. So for CPT coding and insurance and things like that, full device is $500, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Will you care? I mean,
yeah, but
I mean, that it's out of pocketable. I mean, we're off charts in terms of how cheap this is going to be compared to ESG over. Yeah,
100%. I mean, if it's a $500 device, I mean, for sure. I think where the ASC physicians would get concerned, especially if they own their own ASCs, is like, who with any device, not a $500 device or a $2,000 device. I mean, it's who bears the cost for the device, because, like, for example, as you know, and I'm probably preaching the choir here, but when you're doing an EGD with any banding, I think the facility fee, at least in Arizona, for ASCs is probably around $600. And most people, it's the cost to do a procedure somewhere between $220 to $300, depending on how well your centers run. And, unless you're a massive corporation like HSA or Tenet, you may not have the contracts to kind of, get you better reimbursement. So obviously, who bears the cost for any device, whether it's a disposable endoscope or a disposable EUS or a band, it's a cost that adds up. So I think, a CPT code that acknowledges that there's a cost and there's always helpful. But right now, I don't think the ESG code can be used in the ASC, but I'm not sure, and I'd have to double check that statement. So
yeah, no, 100%. I'm with you 100%. Nothing's easy. Nothing's like it. Nothing's going to be simple. But there are two codes for banding,
right,
already, and the people that are already doing it just coded for banding. Like back at Indiana University, they were doing this. I mean, you've been doing this a long time.
For sure.
With great results. This is Glenn Lehman at Indiana University who's doing this. We put a paper out on it, all successful.
Right.
Coding for EMR, and he was removing the Barrett's esophagus, and then he said, well, what the heck? I'm going to treat this at the source. He just took his Duet kit from Duet with the same code, went down, retroflexed his scope.
Mm-hmm.
He put a couple of bands and snared at the LES, had great results, pleated the skirt, got it nice and tight around the black snake. He could hardly pull it out. He had to pull the scope out. In fact, I asked him, I said, what about dysphagia and stuff? And he just laughed. You guys know Glenn Lehman. He's wonderful. He said, well, then we know it works. Because then we just, balloon dilate or something.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a whole range. I think there's going to be a lot of early adopters that are working in environments and cultures where they're able to do this. We will have the hemostasis and hemorrhoid bander, actual on the label for the indication initially.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be this November, November. We'll come out with all the device, the GERD device with all the fancy bands and the barrel, but it'll be for, on label hemostasis, banding, GI banding for hemostasis, generic indication, not for the treatment indication of GERD or obesity. And then I think the FDA, and of course the jury's out, but I think they're going to give us, they've told us, but it's not official, that we'll get encircle, your band, your barrel goes encircle, lift, hit your suction button, lift,
right,
compress,
mm-hmm.
and treat.
Nice.
That's very early. So for those listening out there, don't hold me to that. But if we get that on the label, because that's what Avesco started with, just so you don't think we're pirates and we're these horrible people.
No, not at all.
You did it. Yeah, that's all they all do. And then they go for 510K after they're on the market so that people can get IRBs, they can get, their ethics committee approval, wherever you are, whatever you need. They're able to do that. They can get on a study. We'll have those, kind of like it's kind of like what Fractal's doing. They're already, advertising for people to join or study, but we're not putting hot steam down your esophagus.
Yeah, exactly.
30-year-old machine technology.
Yeah.
And so I guess the question though, so obviously you have many differentiating features with the size and the depth and also the side ports on some of them. So, and you mentioned earlier in our conversation, like physicians will say, well, are you on contract and how much does it cost, etc. So, I mean, and I know you've probably thought this through, and the question I have is, you're going to run into people who are going to say, well, that's really nice, but I've already got a Super 7, or I've already got a 6-shooter. Why do I need to use your bander when I can use that bander, And obviously the proof is in the details with some of that you have maybe a bigger deployment system, a deeper deployment. But kind of walk me through that as, you're in a very unique situation as the CEO and an inventor and an innovator here. But on the flip side of it, you have a real threat from, I'll call it the big three, that make these devices. Well, maybe not Olympus in this situation, but how do you protect yourself as a company, and how do you, show people like, hey, this is a better way to do it, and this is why you should be using this as opposed to the existing technology?
That's actually the question, because obviously Jose Nieto has the GIE video,
Right.
of ARBM, anti-reflux band mucosectomy, and guess what he's using? Is Boston Scientific. I called him. I said, Jose, has Boston called you? He goes, no, nothing.
Yeah.
He said, well, get over here. I'm out of here. Like, right away. Like, don't do any more cases. But, yeah, I mean, it works. I mean, Dr. Inoue has been doing this again, for years.
Yeah.
And with ablation. The reason he does that, I'm not trying to act like a know-it-all, but I work for Cook, and they would never buy any of our banders because it's culturally improper to buy anything that Inoue does not agree with, and he's an Olympus guy. So, Olympus, I think it might have changed 20 years ago, but I love Professor Inoue. He's amazing. But he was doing it with Olympus suck and cut, so he was doing it without banding, so there was no protection, right? He was just snaring and cutting.
Mm-hmm.
Giant barrel, by the way. So, and again, he's Inoue. He's a surgeon. And perforation rates are probably unacceptable to Western endoscopists. I mean, just honestly, if you look at the stuff those guys are doing. But so, yeah, I mean, so you have that whole history of people using, esophageal varus, the 9mm barrel. Just remember, if you remember anything, esophageal varix, your grandfather's barrel and your grandfather's bands, they're 9mm wide. They're about 10mm deep, and they use toy helicopter bands. Nothing against toy helicopters. They're great. I love them.
Mm-hmm.
So, for the long-term answer to your question is, after a year and a half, we'll be the only company in the market that has treatment indication specific. So you can code for them. You can get rid of in ASC. So that's the long view.
Right.
We're keeping our eye on the ball in the long view with that. And we'll already be into DMR by then as well, which we're doing first in human 2 months. And again, guess where? Santiago, Chile.
Yeah, of course.
No, there's bad. Yeah. That's where I started.
Yeah. Are you guys looking at, I know people in the past have talked about banding for GAVE, for example. Is that something that you're looking at with your device as well?
Yeah. So great question. So you're asking about innovation a little bit. We're right here on time. Are we okay for another 5 minutes?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
For those that are listening, if you're listening, stay on for a second, because there's this aha question I think was to me.
Yeah.
My aha doesn't matter. What really matters is the aha of the physician that pioneered this endoscopic band gastroplasty. His name's Muhammad Abid. There's many world experts in banding. I don't know if there's many that have placed 10,000 intragastric balloons. Mostly SPATS 3. He's also trained in pose 2, and he also has trained in ESG with overstitch.
Right.
And he's a wonderful guy, and he's the right kind of endoscopist. Anybody will love this gentleman. He is actually went to high school in Pennsylvania. Imagine it.
Yeah.
Many out of U.S. doctors speak English, but this guy actually can talk to you and, clear the whole thing. So many people out of the U.S. gave watermelon stomach in, the antrum or, in the stomach, which a lot of people say laughs at bands, right? And when they say that, they laugh at the helicopter bands with EVL barrels, right? I get it because, they can't grab that tough, stomach lining tissue. They're made for variceal ligation, and that's great. Some are really good and they can double pump the suction. They can get it just right. He's one of those.
Mm-hmm.
They can't afford APC, so they can't. This is a university hospital in Cairo, and I run into this in Latin America all the time. And you got to love these guys. They're, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention, I think. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, my mentor, Claudio Navarrete, taught me all that. He'd go, I want to do a sphincterotomy. Do you have a mini-tome? I go, no. He goes, what do you have? Well, standard sphincterotomy. He goes, give it to me. Yeah. He took it. He took a knife, cut it, started whittling on the tip, and he held it out in his left hand. He goes, this is the FDA. If it passes my hand, it's going to go into my patient. I was like, guys. Of course, there's limits to this, right? Over here. For sure. So this guy was working with his nurse, trusted nurse. They do, all these cases. They do 3 times the cases that we would ever think would be humanly, possible in these centers in the middle of Cairo. She happens to be obese and had a very difficult time, with weight up, bouncing all around her whole career. And she was his ERCP nurse, I think, but they had just done an ESG. They can't afford the device, but he's got a great relationship with Apollo, now Olympus. So he was doing a study. He's published on this. You're going to see Dr. Abid on ESG. He's published on POSE. I mean, he's the real deal. So he's in there, and they're doing GAVE with banding because they can't afford the APC. It would be their second choice, but that's all they have.
Right.
And he's using a copy of the Cook 6-shooter, which everybody listening, 9 millimeter diameter, 9 millimeter depth. Remember helicopter band, latex bands. Okay. He's in there. He's so good. Like all y'all listening, you're that good. You can use anything. You can cannulate with a garden hose. He finishes this pattern for GAVE. Well, guess what? He had just done the ESG in the greater curve that morning with the same nurse who is obese. Mm-hmm. She turns to him and says, Dr. Abid, why don't you just take that pattern and move it up into the greater curve? And he kind of looked at her and said, well, that'll never work. It's not strong enough to actually make a sleeve. Mm-hmm. This nurse, brilliant, says, you don't have to. You just there's 5 rugae lines, vertical lines in the greater curve. They're you stick out like puffy, cake. He goes, all you have to do is put the bands along those rows, 6 on each one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 30 bands in total. And it will be like a rivet, and it'll stop those rugae from spreading. Those listening, if like on a bridge, they leave little spaces. So in the summer, the bridge will expand.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the stomach does. Those rugae sort of allow it to expand. So again, back to Dick Fosbury in reverse. We're not creating a sleeve. We're stopping the sleeve from ever growing into a greater curve banana. It's reverse. We're not usually suturing it closed. We're stopping it from ever expanding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So he said, okay, so I'm going to put these rivets on these expanding rugae, and I'm going to mimic the thing. That'll never work. They finished the case. He got in his car, and he got halfway home. And he was telling me this over the phone because I read his study, and I called him, and I said, I asked the same question you asked me. What's his aha moment? It took my breath away. It took my breath away. He said, I pulled over on the side of the road, and I just sat there looking at my steering wheel, and I said, this is going to work.
Uh-huh.
He called his nurse and said, how can we do this? She goes, I'll be there at 9 a.m. All I need is propofol. He goes, okay.
So he does it on his nurse.
Put it on the nurse. She does the whole thing. It's all they need. The FDA guideline, 10% total weight loss, 20x loss. Serious adverse events, low. Yeah. He hit everything. I mean, she exceeded everything immediately. Satiety, the whole 9 yards.
Wow.
Well, yeah. So we started doing this. But again, back to your original question, he's doing it. It's very difficult for him to do it with, again, 9 millimeter diameter. Your grandfather's, varicose ligation. It works. He can do it, but it's more effective using Endolastics, innovative. And of course, we calibrate all this, right? We know the exact volume, right? We do, right? We think about this stuff all the time. My arms are actually black and blue. People sometimes after, because I band myself all the time. I used to band underneath my neck. They're like, "You're out of your mind," because I'm with Yodel fanatic. So we kind of know, anyway, that's another thing. But we do a lot of tests and studies to show what kind of pressure you need, what the calibration of the band needs to be. It's not helicopter bands, by the way. 9 millimeter diameter, by the way, and it's not 10 millimeter depth. So we have a lot of stuff, and we don't know everything. I'm raising my hand here. We do not know everything, but we know enough to be safe and effective. And so I think that goes back to your original question. Why can't they just use your grandfather's Super 7 or AA?
Yeah.
You probably can. After 2 years, you're not going to be in the game because we're going to have the indication.
Right.
So you're code for it. And if I'll try to put enough information out with real data, benchtop and others, stuff, and then to show you some good images on why it's more effective, to pleat a skirt, if you will, for GERD, or to cause these rugae, in the greater curve, so you'll never get the large, greater curve.
Well, yeah, and to your point, actually, I've just thought of this as you were giving your answer about that. Is people have asked that question about the Duet and the Captivator EMR kit. Like, well, why don't I just use it's the same band, or why don't I use it? But the kit is actually approved for EMR. The band by itself is not approved for an EMR. And the snare, so you're when you have that kit, it's approved. So when you have a device that has like an FDA approval, and then you get on your directions for use and an indication for it, then you can say, yeah, you could use X, Y, or Z's bander, but it's not approved. It's off label. And that's always a big buzzword, especially in the US with liability and everything like that. So,
yeah, the cool thing, 100%, 100%, I'm with you. But we're just not going to do nothing. We're not right. We're disruptors. So we're obviously going to play by the rules.
Right.
We're provided to early adopters in the US that can manage it through, if they want to join a study. We'll do whatever we have to do to be able to have them use it. But the big part of that first year, when we're getting our studies done and getting for the indication, and I'm confident we're going to have really good success compared to Sofix in that case. That's actually going to be our predicate. And then Overstitch for obesity, which will also be our predicate, along with banding. I'm talking about the 510K for the actual treatment.
For sure.
The real thing is that that Latin America goes off the FDA. So I have a great network in Latin America. Remember, I was the Latin American DR.
Yeah.
Well, all those distributors will be, in this period, starting in November, we'll all be using it for GERD and obesity, watching the videos, getting trained. The training, if you talk to Jose Nieto, is watch D1, do one.
Right.
I mean, watch one, do one, train one.
Teach one, yep.
You just have to know where to start, and it's a little tricky. You have to. He has his video is so beautiful, almost fell off my chair. Yeah. I told him, I said, that's unbelievable. He goes, I know, it's how I'll teach it. And he's gotten out of the academic game. He's coaching his kids softball now, and working. Well, no, he's a clinician, full on. Yeah. But he's not into he won't be doing a lot of publishing and stuff for the next few years. He sort of rearranged his priorities. But his training and his pedigree. And I said, Jose, how good is this? He goes, the best device I've ever seen. I said, you're kidding me. Like, he goes, yep, best thing I've ever seen.
That's amazing.
So I was like, wow. And then, of course, but these guys drink the Kool-Aid. I mean, they made the Kool-Aid, right? So for me, this first year is to get guys like you and those listening to get early adoption, get some cases under your belt. You'll start to see live cases internationally because it'll be easier to get those on. But we're not expecting to just walk into every ASC and all of a sudden, have every endoscopist. That's the business goal, though, because, you can do it with propofol. It follows the 20-30-20 rule for ASCs, 20 prep, 30 procedure, 20 recovery. I mean, it's cha-ching there. It's right there.
Well, that's what yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that's ASCs are a huge revenue source for many physicians. And personally, I have benefited in the past from ASCs. Not any longer, but it's anything that doesn't cost a lot in an ASC and it gives great outcomes and it generates the revenue for the ASC is always a winner. So.
Well, the other thing is, just to jump in, is we can also do redos. So people that have the ESG, for example, right here and, go down the road. You guys can't hear this over the video. If you listen real carefully, you hear the Highway 40. Those people are all heading to Duke right now to get their ESG. Or they're all...
Or what's his name? Christopher McGovern up, right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
Love him. He's amazing. And I've also... Vivek Kumbari's a big fan. Right now, but he may be in the future, and we've talked about it. And Dr. Saab up at Hopkins, and we've got a lot of people that understand this technology. They understand what we're doing. We're using 30-year-old. Look, we're using 30-year-old technology. I love your granny shot.
Yeah, we could. If
you just started listening, you would have missed it. But, I'm going to remember that. I'm going to use that. Can I borrow it?
100%. It's yours. You can have it.
But yeah, it's like anything, any new technology, Strata.
Yeah.
Well, and then they're going to find out, like in the case of Strata, that God is really not that good. Apologies to Strata.
Yeah.
Don't come after me, but I remember I was there in the whole wall of shame of GERD at Cook. I was right there with Endosench, Indio. I mean, he just crashed and burned one after another.
Right.
So it is quite a statement. We used to say, if I can use my sports analogy, somebody would come out of Group 1 in whitewater slalom, go across the finish line with a clean run, and they would start waving their arms when all the top guys were still coming down. And I'd say, if you get to the finish line at the World Championships and you think you won, you better be really good or really stupid.
Exactly.
Make that analogy to GERD. If you think you could just walk in and say, okay, esophagus, I'm going to eat your lunch.
Yeah.
Which we will. But if you better be, but you better be really good or really stupid. These are really good people in the industry, and they've put a lot of hard work in this, and they've proved a lot of excellent science. It's just too expensive.
Right.
Burn, stabbing, and cutting. I'm sorry, guys. We're going to point a rubber band gun and do natural pressure necrosis. We're not going to burn, stab, or cut.
No, they're fair. I mean, and just to clarify though, on the anti-reflux banding, that when we mentioned Professor Anyway, and I think we talked about this offline a little bit, but when he was initially doing these, he was actually snaring off the bands or the pseudopolyp, if you will, and creating a mucosal, denuding the mucosal surface to help form the scar tissue. What your approach is going to be is just to band it and leave it. Is that essentially a good way of saying it or to understand it?
It's a great way of saying it. And not only is it just as effective, going all the way back to the IU study. Remember the 5 with banding, Bob Barron's idea. It was Todd's. And then the snaring, which was already being done by a lot of people have done it. Great studies. There's 16 or 17 really reputable studies with great results. When you don't snare, sort of think about this. Think of Dick Fosbury and the Fosbury flop. If you remove the snaring, what have you done? You've gotten rid of the three biggest things. Bleeding, I'm talking big B, not small bleed, but bleeding, perforation, and stricture.
Right.
So all of a sudden, now you go, wait a minute. What if I got some fibers of the muscularis propria into my barrel, and what if I had a band that was capable of holding it?
Right.
Now, it's fibrosis, right?
Right.
What Anyway was doing was effective. It worked. But they took off the mucosal layer, and then sort of the healing process sort of tightened up the submucosal layer and the muscular layer. Nothing's perfect, right? It's not exact. There's little bits of pieces in the histology slide, of course, but our theory is we actually want to recruit some of the fibers because we're going for more of a fibrotic effect for the LES and the obesity, not for duodenal mucosal resurfacing. It's just the opposite. So everybody can imagine what we're doing, right? Our DMR barrel is very shallow.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah. Because you don't want the muscle as much in there. So.
Yeah. If we're endoscopists, we try to design out everything we can for y'all. We try. And then that makes it, and again, it's your skill level, but say you crank that 55 centimeters of mercury on the mucosal layer, you're only going to go up 5 centimeters. 5 meters. So we're going to stop you anyway.
Right.
Through design.
But that makes a ton of sense, right? Because now, obviously, when we're teaching EMR, ESD, or we're doing these for the first time, we're always mindful that the stomach is the best place to learn because it's thicker, and the duodenum is the last place that you want to start doing it after you've gotten expertise, and because it's thinner. So just like what you're saying, to suction up and bunch up all this tissue and let it go, you want to have less for mucosal resection versus, where you want to really fibrosis scar down the muscle layer. So makes a lot of sense.
No, thank you for walking that back to me. Yeah, I'm actually I told Muhammad Abid this too. He said, "Well, I want to start teaching this." I said, "No, you're the worst person to teach this." He goes, "Why?" I said, "Because you made the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
We don't want you."
Yeah, we want the people to drink it. We don't want people who made it, for sure.
That's one of the reasons why Mark DeLegge is on our scientific advisory board, because he's such a rich experience level. He was at MUSC.
Yeah.
Well, as a therapeutic endoscopist, and then he went and did nutrition, and then he went to Baxter, and then he went and worked, for FDA protocols, and I'm so happy to have him because he gives you that outside view. Watch out for this, watch out for this, watch out for this. What about this? If you tested for this, I love Dr. Abid, but he's just, he's ready for the next case. I'm like, stop doing these cases.
Well,
Fritz, we'll publish.
Well, Fritz, first of all, I want to thank you for your time, and this has been extremely fascinating and enlightening. I mean, I think talking about just innovation, leadership, and then definitely getting into the weeds about endolastics and endo-GERD and endo-BMI and all that. I think that for me, as somebody who likes new technology, this has just been a really fun and fascinating conversation, and I think I hope that the listeners to this episode come away with something. I think they will come away with a lot of stuff about all those topics. So I really appreciate your time. But I have one last question for you, because you listen to other podcasts, and I always kind of promote for the interventionalists to join the societies. Join ASGE, join ACG, ASLD, whatever is the one that fits most with your mindset, and that could be the FIGHT, or the Foundation for Interventional Therapeutic Endoscopy. How have these societies kind of shaped what you're going to do and what you want to do? How have they been partners? How have they been problematic, maybe even a way? But what are the good and the bad and the ugly of working with the societies, or eventually getting them involved in your field?
Well, we've been under the radar right now, so this is a little bit of a coming out. We do have a website. We have put some stuff out, but we purposely stayed under the radar. For example, a lot of people have called me, "Are you going to be at TDW? I want to talk. Let's go." I'm purposely not going to DDW.
Yeah.
So just to say, and if you've been listening to me, you're probably hearing me ranting and getting all enthusiastic. Somebody told me, so enthusiasm without controls is not good, but also control without enthusiasm is also not good. So I try to rein myself in with the excitement, because this is the most exciting thing I've ever seen, honestly, that I've worked on. It actually found me. I didn't find it. Like Osteomeric banding, actually, it called out to me, if that makes any sense, how the universe sort of works. But I've had great relationships with ASGE, especially their Chicago training courses. In fact, we used to do banding courses all the time, which actually gave me ideas. I won't go into all that now. We're getting near the end. But One of the things I'm excited about is I actually have a database for ASGE endoscopists that I'm trying not to take advantage of until I have a chance to actually get like the launch, for example. We're talking about when we'll have our product ready. So I feel privileged and honored to be able to access, the ASGE group. That's the one that I have, the most experience with.
Right.
But yeah, that's sort of a short answer. Are we wrapping up or?
Yeah, but if you have anything more, we can go into that. Yeah.
Yeah. One more thing I wanted to say. It just hit me. Okay. So here I am, director of marketing and product management at Cook Medical, focusing mainly on ERCP.
Right.
We have tons of great products. I know what all the sales dollars are. I know where they all are. I know we have all the great PowerPoints coming up. We had a stent called the Geenan stent. It was put out. It had little flaps on it, so we're introducing inside the pancreas it was specifically for post-ERCP pancreatitis prevention.
Yeah.
And we had really good studies and Joe Geenan was I actually met him much times, great guy. And so he was behind the stent, made a lot of sense. We own 100% of the market. So Mark Cotton, if you're listening, I think he went to Hawaii, for the number one type of award on other stuff too, but I'm sure the Geenan stent was in there.
Yeah.
So every year you see your sales numbers, right? Here they come, and you see your little bar graphs and your rubber chicken graphs and all the crap that you do when you're in corporate. And so I see the Geenan stent, 10 million, I think, in sales or, whatever it was worldwide, not huge, but significant, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, there's no sales. I'm like, what's going on? We've got our sales force. We've got our live case. We have our CPT codes. We have all the papers behind it. We have Mark Cotton going in and twisting arms and doing all the wonderful stuff that Mark does. We're doing everything right. What is going on? And I looked down, maybe I talked to some rep or something, and I found an online company called Hobbs Medical. They only sold online, and it was the Freeman Flex stent or something. It was a complete Me Too copy of the Geenan stent.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the material was a little bit better. It's actually a good stent.
Mm-hmm.
They took 100%. They took the whole market.
Oh, wow.
It's 6 months. And I burned that into my brain. I didn't know where I would ever use this information. I didn't know I would be at Endolastic and that I would be going direct to, facilities and doctors and wouldn't be using 100-person sales force and having giant booths at DDW and eating coffee and donuts to the whole nursing stuff. I never knew any of this, but I just remembered, oh my God, if you have a really good product, it's disruptive, it's an order of magnitude cheaper,
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be significant. It can't be, 10% cheaper. And you have good science behind it, and it makes a lot of sense. It's actually possible. I'm not saying, I'm not going to, jinx this thing. But Hobbs Medical taught me a really important lesson. Listen, they always do it. They're right up on my wall. I just got Hobbs Medical. And I just want to, if that sort of colors some of these answers in.
Yeah, no, it absolutely ties a lot of that in. I appreciate that. So, no, but I want to thank you for your time. This has been even more than generous with it, and I really, really appreciate that. And thank you. And the one last thing I'll say before we sign off is just my usual PSA about mental health for any physicians out there or anybody listening. Medical careers are very challenging. They're very draining, and they can be. And if you're struggling, reach out to somebody and talk it through. So thank you so much, Fritz. Pleasure to meet you, and I really appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thanks.